Michael Chandler vs Dustin Poirier is going to be an absolute war. With UFC 281 right around the corner, one of the most exciting fights to most people is this fight between Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier. Due to the entertaining style of both of these guys, and alongside with the fact that they both have somewhat of a beef with each other. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Dustin Poirier vs Michael Chandler has been a matchup that many fans and Michael Chandler himself wanted for a very long time. Initially, when Michael Chandler won his first ever UFC fight by knockout against Dan Hooker, he called out Dustin Poirier immediately. But at the time, Poirier didn't feel as if Chandler was deserving of that opportunity, so he didn't get it. And that's how this beef started between these two guys, which is a little funny to see considering that both of them are such nice people. But that's kind of the backstory that led us to today. But now let's actually talk about the fight. So this is definitely a very interesting matchup. On one hand, you have a ridiculously powerful wrestler with also ability on his feet, against a guy who's more so of a volume puncher and a very talented striker, while also having a nice ability on the ground in terms of his jiu-jitsu. But first, let's start with Michael Chandler and break his game down. So starting off with his boxing, Chandler definitely has a decent ability. I wouldn't say he's great, but at the same time, I wouldn't say he's bad. He has a decent jab, he has a decent uppercut, hook, cross. He has the ability to switch stances, but for the most part, he stays in that orthodox stance. But the biggest value and the biggest X factor of Chandler's boxing is his power. He has a ton of power in those hands, and with that power, he can knock out anybody. But moving on to his kicks, Chandler definitely has nice kicks out there as well. He has really nice kicks to the legs, specifically lower calf kicks. He has nice kicks to the body, nice kicks to the head, although he doesn't utilize those head kicks all that much, which is funny to say considering he just got a huge knockout over Tony Ferguson with a front kick to the face. But that's not necessarily something he utilizes all that much, but who knows, maybe going forward he'll try it out a little bit more. But mostly on the feet, Chandler looks for that one big shot. Whether that means it's with his fist or with his kicks, it doesn't really matter. He's always looking for that big shot to get the KO. Now in close, Chandler has an ability to throw elbows and knees to the body. But on the feet, if I could use two different words to describe Chandler, I would say powerful and explosive. But now moving on to his chin, I would say Chandler has an okay chin. He doesn't have a bad chin, but at the same time, he doesn't have a good chin. But now moving on to his ground game, this is an area where Michael Chandler excels. This is certainly the best ability of his overall fighting profile, which is something that not many people see because he doesn't utilize it that much, especially in the UFC. But in my opinion, in this fight, based upon interviews and based upon the fact that he's fighting someone that he doesn't really like all that much, I think Chandler is going to utilize that wrestling a lot more to ensure he wins, or at least give him the best opportunity to win this matchup. Because it's pretty clear in the wrestling department, Chandler has an advantage. He has a really nice ability at taking other fighters down with that explosion and technique that he uses, but once he gets fighters on the ground and he's in full guard or maybe even mount, he does a great job at throwing ground and pound shots and always looking to put away the opposing fighter. But now, let's move on to Dustin Poirier and see what he does well. So Poirier is certainly a very well balanced fighter. He's very talented on the feet while also at the same time being very talented on the ground as well. But starting with his stand-up abilities and starting with his boxing specifically, Poirier has phenomenal boxing, and he's certainly known as being one of the better boxers in the UFC. Dustin has a great jab, he has a really nice uppercut, a fantastic hook, he can switch stances whenever he wants, and overall in terms of his boxing, I would consider him more of a volume puncher, but he certainly has some power as well, making him an extremely dangerous fighter for any opposing guy. But besides his fantastic boxing, Dustin also has a nice ability to throw kicks specifically to the lower legs, and we saw this specifically in the second Conor McGregor fight. Now in close, Dustin has a nice ability to fire in knees to the body while also firing in some elbows to the face. In terms of his chin, Dustin certainly has one of the better chins in the UFC, although one thing I will say is he does have a lot of miles on him at this point, so it somewhat remains to be seen how well his chin would be, but in my opinion, I think it'll be great. But now moving on to his ground game, Dustin isn't necessarily known for his wrestling ability, but he is known for his jiu-jitsu ability. Dustin certainly has a nice ability to pull off some submissions, specifically that guillotine, which is his signature move. And he even was almost able to catch Khabib in that guillotine. But overall, I would certainly give a pretty big advantage to Michael Chandler in terms of the ground game. But now, let's break this fight down and let me give my opinion on who I think will win and why. So I definitely think this is a very interesting fight, and I can easily see it going either way. But first, let's start with the obvious. If the fight stays on the feet for the most part, I would say Poirier has around a 75 to 80% chance of winning. And if the fight were to stay on the feet, in my opinion, the only real way that Michael Chandler would win would be if he got a crazy knockout, with either a huge right hook or maybe another front kick to the face. But if he isn't able to knock Poirier out, and the fight's on the feet for the most part, I find it very hard to believe that Michael Chandler would be able to win by decision. But if Michael Chandler looks to utilize that wrestling a lot more in this matchup, I could easily see him getting the better of Dustin in a decision victory perhaps. Now this is certainly going to be a big question, because in my opinion, as I mentioned before, I think Chandler has a pretty big advantage on the ground, but the question is, will he utilize it? Ever since Chandler got to the UFC, he's been so concerned with entertaining the fans, and although he does bring very entertaining fights, he has lost a couple of fights where maybe he otherwise would have won if he didn't care about entertaining the fans as much. Now in interviews leading up to this fight, it seems like he's a little bit more focused on getting the win as opposed to just entertaining us, but there definitely are still questions because it's easy to say it now, but when he's in the cage with the bright lights of Madison Square Garden and fighting Dustin Poirier, it's going to be interesting to see what he actually does. So in my opinion, what Michael Chandler we get out there is probably going to determine who wins this fight. If Chandler's looking to entertain, I feel like Dustin has a great chance of winning this matchup, but if Chandler is looking to get the victory, I think he actually has a really good chance of winning this matchup by utilizing that wrestling. But at this point, if I had to go with my official prediction, I probably would say Dustin Poirier by decision. He definitely hits hard, and I can definitely see him knocking out Michael Chandler, but I see Michael Chandler as a very tough guy, and even if he does get hurt, I see him staying in the fight utilizing that wrestling. But of course, anything could happen. I do think there's some good value in Michael Chandler betting wise, but I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with this matchup. But I certainly am very, very excited for it, and I easily could see it being the fight of the night. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Dustin Poirier is going to win this matchup, or do you think Michael Chandler will? And in what method do you think they'll win? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy it, check one of these two videos popping up now. And until the next time, peace out, guys.